After the events of World War II, former allies, the US and the Soviet Union, found each other in the stalemate of the Cold War. Both sides needed some way to intimidate the other, and there were few options, with the best ones being nuclear bombs. But bombs were not enough to win wars on their own, because they could not use them without the chance of there being a nuclear war. A nuclear war and its fallout would have been detrimental to both sides and possibly the entire world. So soon, both sides realized they needed a more technical advantage: satellites. The Soviet Union and America quickly began trying to make rocket after rocket, many failing, but some succeeded, like that of Sputnik 1 and later Sputnik 2 and 3. The launch of the Sputnik missions between 1957 and 1958 revolutionized space technology by introducing Doppler tracking and providing the first data on how space affected living beings, prompting an American reaction that led to the creation of NASA and increased funding in science and engineering, and making U.S. leaders fear the Soviet Union's advances in rocketry and ICBM capability. To better understand why the space race started, both powers had different ideologies, and just in general had many conflicting interests after World War II ended, with some major ones being the vastly different economic systems and their conflicting visions regarding Europe post-war. These issues caused the two to start a proxy war through other, smaller countries, where they would give financial and military aid to fuel the conflict in the hopes to wear down the other group into submission, without the need for nuclear arms usage. Though nukes may have been out of the question, Sputnik's 1 existence stirred up plenty of controversy. With the general paranoia from World War II and Cold War's effects still very much present in society at the time, and the increasing risk of nuclear war despite the obvious devastation, this had a massive impact on the Cold War's outcome. Sputnik 1 was the first sign of intercontinental attacks, whether ballistic, nuclear, or otherwise. This was certainly a cause of severe political unrest among many countries. Besides this, one of the most important segments in the Cold War would be the space race, as it was one of the last major things that occurred or spurred from the Cold War, which Sputnik 1 kickstarted by introducing fully orbital technology. Sputnik 1's original purpose was to show the superiority of the Soviets by showing how they are more technologically advanced than their adversary by launching the first artificial satellite into orbit, though this wasn't originally stated to be the case. However, and was masked as a simple weather satellite, it clearly had the means to be used or applied for military purposes. One such option could have been intercontinental ballistic missiles, ICBMs. Some important people in the creation of the satellite included Sergei Korolev, who provided scientific support for the project, as well as Mstislav Keldysh, who was the chief designer for the project. Other people who did make an impact on the satellite's creation and effect as an accomplishment were Dmitry Ustinov, who supported the program with funding, and Nikita Khrushchev, who used Sputnik 1 as a propaganda piece. This was seen as an extremely important event to everyone involved. On one hand, this was the first satellite sent into the planet's orbit by man, meaning we could use technology like Sputnik 1 to do things like worldwide communication, or tracking the way the Earth looks, or how weather forms, among other things. While on the other hand, for many countries, most importantly the US, this was seen as a massive issue with the satellite's existence. This put the US on the technological and political back foot. This would show their lack of innovation compared to the Soviets, while also risking being put into a metaphorical chokehold in the Cold War conflict due to aerial inferiority. Before Sputnik 1's launch, worldwide communication systems and information were limited compared to now, with satellites letting us connect with people from all around the world, and further spreading and diversifying the ideas thought of. Satellites not existing meant no space travel could have been initiated before, whether with satellites, drones, people, or etc. This also meant that before then, things like phones and other electronics were far less advanced because there were no satellites to pick up all the data. Data was dispersed through landlines and undersea cables. While these weren't as easy to work with as a space satellite, which could work as a giant router and to any part of the world. It was also the groundwork for GPS. As the official aerospace stats website states, a group of scientists in the Applied Physics Laboratory, APL, at Johns Hopkins University observed a strange phenomenon. The frequency of radio signals transmitted by Sputnik increased as the satellite approached, and the signal frequency decreased as it moved away. They later expanded the idea. If a satellite location could be determined from the ground via the frequency shift in its radio signal, then the location of a receiver on the ground could be determined by its distance from a satellite.
Sputnik 1's creation alone was an insane event, as it was the first introduction to a successfully orbital satellite. Unlike previous rockets and spacecraft, which could only reach suborbital status, this spacefaring prototype could stay in Earth's atmosphere. This naturally caused a wide variety of responses across the world. For someone interested in the advancement of society only, or someone that was part of Soviet Russia, this would be seen as a great thing. However, for the inhabitants of adversaries of Soviet Russia at the time, this could have been seen as a shocking or scary thing to think about. As with the implications of Sputnik 1's success, came many other issues about how this would be applied. Whether just looking at it from a Cold War standpoint, or from thinking on how this would change the way society functions due to this achievement. This could have been seen as a very negative event. While we've mostly focused on Sputnik 1, this NAC project is also about Sputnik 2 and 3. While they did not achieve as much as Sputnik 1, they're still important to later missions into space, with Sputnik 2 being made less than a month after the original's launch and led by Sergei Vernov, with the intent to measure radiation such as UV and X-rays. The Sputnik 2 was the second satellite developed and tested under Russian care that was capable of orbital flight. Being launched less than a month after the original's launch, this satellite was very important when it first launched because it was the first orbital satellite to boast life support systems. The Sputnik 2 was rushed in order to maximize its value. As with the Cold War, progress was power, and then showcasing multiple groundbreaking feats in the time span of a month was insane. However, due to the rushing of the project and demanding deadlines, the satellite was never made to survive long periods of time, so the passenger, like the dog, was sent to die in the name of progress. The Sputnik 3 was the pinnacle of satellite technology for its time, and was actually intended to be the first satellite, as it was the first of the Sputnik satellites to be designed. However, it was pushed to the side temporarily in order to produce the far less expensive Sputnik 1, which was more of a test dummy, to test if the more advanced Sputnik 3 would work. When the Sputnik 1 turned out to be a very influential event in their favor, the Russians decided to quickly produce a second satellite, with rudimentary life support systems in order to be the first to send a living organism into space. After both of these simple designs were made, the Russians finally completed the original design. Sputnik 3, also known as Object D, while Sputnik 3 didn't necessarily do anything new, it definitely was an improvement over the previous models. While the first satellite was only made to achieve orbital status, the Sputnik 3 was the first to be designed to take advantage of that, with it hosting various scientific instruments in order to gather data on Earth's upper atmosphere and space. Sputnik missions starting the space race had a lasting impact on the rest of the Cold War, with the Soviets seemingly always one step ahead of the US, only for the US to come in last minute and successfully put the first man on the moon, which would make them the winners of the space race and the main benefactors due to the boost of morale for the entire country and the advancements made in technology. Beyond this, the Cold War and its many events ended up making the US create its own space agency, otherwise known as NASA. And through the Cold War, the US has spread its influence across many countries and made many diplomatic relationships. The Cold War is remembered as a very unconventional war and a time of large advancements in technology. The technology produced during the Cold War that remain prominent to this day include jet engines, satellites, computer technology, nuclear power, and even the internet. The Sputnik missions are at the core of many of these achievements, and we wouldn't be where we are in terms of technology, or even as a society, if not for their existence and what they did. We would likely be far less advanced, and might even have had to live an entirely different life under a new order, like that of the communist ideology.